In the wake of Pope Leo XIV's historic election as the first American pontiff, a powerful letter has emerged from the heart of Africa. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the interim president of Burkina Faso, has penned a heartfelt message to the new pope, urging a reevaluation of the Catholic Church's role in Africa. This letter, rich in emotion and historical context, serves as both a critique and a call to action, highlighting the complex relationship between Africa and the Church. A voice from the Sahel. Captain Traoré begins his letter not from a place of comfort, but from the soil of my homeland, Burkina Faso. He paints a vivid picture of a land where dust mingles with the blood of our martyrs, setting the tone for a message that is both personal and political. Traoré positions himself not as a diplomat, but as a son of Africa, bearing the weight of a continent's history and aspirations, the Church's dual legacy. The letter delves into the complex legacy of the Catholic Church in Africa, while acknowledging the spiritual guidance and community the Church has provided. Traoré does not shy away from criticizing its historical complicity in colonialism. He points out that the Church at times walked beside colonizers, highlighting the painful paradox of a faith that preached salvation while being entangled in systems of oppression. A call for active solidarity. Traoré challenges Pope Leo XIV to move beyond symbolic gestures and engage in active solidarity with Africa. He questions whether the new pope will see Africa not as a periphery, but as the prophetic center. The letter urges the pope to speak out against the forces that perpetuate poverty and conflict on the continent, including economic exploitation and geopolitical interference, highlighting contemporary struggles. The letter does not dwell solely on historical grievances, but brings attention to current issues facing Africa. Traoré references the ongoing challenges in Burkina Faso, including the fight against jihadist insurgencies and the struggle for economic independence. He emphasizes the need for the Church to be a vocal advocate for justice, rather than a passive observer. A vision for a just church. Traoré's message is not one of despair, but of hope for a church that aligns itself with the oppressed. He calls for a papacy that walks barefoot with the poor and dares to speak truth in Rome as boldly as it does in Rwanda. The letter envisions a church that measures its power not by wealth or influence, but by its commitment to justice and truth. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's letter to Pope Leo XIV is a poignant reminder of the Church's potential to be a force for good in the world. It challenges the new pope to confront uncomfortable truths and to lead with courage and compassion. As Africa continues to grapple with the legacies of colonialism and the realities of modern-day exploitation, the Church's response to this letter will be a testament to its commitment to justice and solidarity. Now let us go into a more profound details of this. The letter, a cry from the Sahel. In a world dulled by political speeches and sanitized press releases, Captain Ibrahim Traoré's letter was a literary explosion. It didn't read like diplomacy, it read like prophecy. This was no hollow bureaucratic memo dispatched through sterile embassies. It was a sacred fire lit from the dust of Ouagadougou and flung across oceans straight into the heart of the Vatican. Literary and rhetorical power. The letter's language is defiant, rhythmic, almost biblical in cadence. It echoes with the call and response of African churches and the revolutionary hymns of the continent's freedom fighters. At times poetic, at others sharp as a bayonet, it is unapologetically African, full of metaphor, memory, and mourning. I write to you not from a palace, nor from the comforts of foreign embassies, it begins, but from the soil of my homeland, the land of Burkina Faso, where dust mingles with the blood of our martyrs. From the opening line, Traoré asserts his moral position, not just as a politician, but as a witness to history and a vessel of the continent's pain. The letter flows like scripture, and each paragraph feels like a sermon, structured to move, convict, and awaken. What makes this letter so striking is its synthesis of four modes of discourse. Personal, as Traoré speaks with the intimacy of a son of Africa. Historical, as he recounts the scars of colonialism and betrayal. Political, as he indicts the powers that profit from African suffering. Spiritual, as he calls on the Pope not just as a man, but as the steward of 1 billion souls. Africa's dual history with the Church, salvation and subjugation. We Africans know the power of the cross, he writes. We have built churches with calloused hands and defended our faith with our blood. Yet he quickly juxtaposes this with a painful truth. The Church, while offering salvation, often walks side by side with the sword. Missionaries baptized babies while colonial administrators stole the land beneath their feet. Prayers for heaven were offered while chains were locked on earth. This is the central tension. The Church gave Africans Christ, but not always justice. And for Traoré, that dichotomy must be resolved. The Church and colonialism, complicit silence, Eurocentrism, and missionary contradictions. The letter forcefully recalls how the Church, far from being neutral, often legitimized colonial regimes. While missionaries prayed for our souls, soldiers littered our lands, Traoré reminds the Pope. The accusation is not just about history. It's about a system that persists through the soft power of theology. Catholicism, as practiced in Africa, is still overwhelmingly European in its liturgy, leadership, and worldview. By invoking saints of the continent, Sankara, Lumumba, Nkrumah, Traoré draws a parallel between martyrdom for political liberation and sainthood for spiritual virtue. For him, Africa's prophets have already spoken. The Church now must listen. Modern day indifference, from slum photo ops to drone strikes. Perhaps the most searing critique comes when Traoré challenges the Pope's role in today's world. Will you be the Pope who does not only visit slums for photo opportunities, but who dares to speak with rage against the forces that make those slums permanent? He accuses the Church of embracing a selective morality, offering symbolic sympathy while remaining silent on structural violence. Drone strikes, proxy wars, migration crises, arms deals, all are mentioned as modern instruments of African suffering, ignored or gently sidestepped by global faith leaders in Rome. The economics of exploitation, extractivism, neo-colonialism, and resource plunder. What began with missionaries now continues with multinationals. Traoré highlights how Western corporations continue to extract uranium, gold, and rare earth minerals from Africa, often under military protection, sometimes with Western countries complicit in stoking unrest to keep profits flowing. We are done asking for permission to exist, he declares. We are done pleading for validation from powers who exploit our minerals while preaching morality. This is more than economic critique. It's spiritual. It's a challenge to the Church to denounce not just sin in the abstract, but systems of sin that operate in the boardrooms of Paris, Brussels, and Washington. Core demands. At the heart of the letter is a bold spiritual ultimatum. Traoré is not merely appealing for recognition, he is demanding a reckoning. 1. A papacy that confronts imperialism. He calls on Pope Leo XIV to walk the path of Christ, not only with the poor, but against the powerful, to name the demons not just of lust or greed, but of empire. We need a pope who will thunder against economic empires, he writes, just as boldly as the church once thundered against communism. This is a demand for a shift in focus, from policing private morality to challenging public systems of oppression. 2. A Vatican that uses its moral voice for African sovereignty. He challenges the Vatican to abandon neutrality where there is injustice. Silence is no longer holy, and neutrality is no longer noble, he says. In a region where France's military presence is controversial and the United States funds counterterrorism operations, Traoré demands that the Vatican take a clear moral stand. Will the Pope speak out against the presence of foreign mercenaries, the manipulation of local economies through loans and trade deals, the political engineering that destabilizes democracies? 3. A church that names the modern-day Herods. Most powerful is his spiritual metaphor, likening the architects of African exploitation to Herod, the biblical tyrant who ordered the slaughter of innocents. Traoré's challenge is to the heart of Christian ethics. If the church is serious about protecting the vulnerable, then it must name the villains. In this, he invokes the legacy of Jesus not just as a savior, but as a revolutionary. Christ, after all, flipped tables and defied empire. Traoré is asking, will Pope Leo XIV do the same? A cry, echoing beyond the letter. Traoré closes not with supplication, but with sacred urgency. We are rewriting the narrative, he says. Africa's time is no longer coming. It is here. It is a prophetic moment when the church is being asked not to evangelize Africa, but to listen to it, not to lead it, but to stand with it. For too long, the Vatican has offered prayers while remaining politically and economically aloof. Now, a captain from the Sahel has called out, not in anger, but in conviction. If the church will not march with the people, what gospel does it still have to preach? The church's colonial legacy. To understand the full weight of Captain Traoré's letter, one must look backward into the long shadow of the church's involvement in European colonization. For centuries, the Catholic Church did not merely coexist with empire, it often sanctified it. In the late 15th century, the Vatican issued the doctrine of discovery, a papal bull granting Christian explorers the divine right to claim any non-Christian land they discovered. This edict was the theological bedrock for colonial conquest and slavery, legitimizing everything from the transatlantic slave trade to the carving up of Africa at the Berlin Conference in 1884. As European empires expanded into Africa, missionaries often arrived as the vanguard of colonization. In places like Congo, Catholic missions were deeply intertwined with King Leopold II's grotesque regime of rubber extraction and human mutilation. In South Africa, the church largely remained quiet during apartheid, issuing careful statements of concern, but rarely confronting the regime with the moral fire it deserved. In Rwanda, certain Catholic institutions were later accused of abetting the 1994 genocide, either by omission or direct participation. Even in Nigeria, where Christianity spread rapidly, missionaries facilitated colonial goals, often denigrating indigenous religions as demonic and helping to enforce European models of governance and education that alienated local traditions. Traoré's letter reverberates with these buried histories. His question to the Pope is implicit but clear. Can a church that once stood alongside colonizers now stand with the colonized? Redemption and reformation attempts. In fairness, the Church has not remained entirely static. The Second Vatican Council, 1962 to 1965, ushered in a wave of reforms, including the promotion of indigenous languages in the liturgy and an emphasis on the universal dignity of humanity. More recently, Pope Francis took unprecedented steps to acknowledge the Church's colonial complicity. His 2023 trip to the Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan was accompanied by speeches condemning the exploitation of Africa's resources and the hypocrisy of international indifference. Still, for many Africans, these gestures feel like moral window dressing. While Pope Francis visited slums and met with war victims, the institutional church has yet to challenge the deeper economic structures, multinational companies, foreign debt traps, and military interventions that underpin Africa's ongoing suffering. And this is the core of Traoré's critique, that the Church's compassion remains symbolic, rarely systemic. Prayers are offered, but power is left unchallenged. Pope Leo XIV, freshly elected, inherits this paradox. His predecessors offered apologies and gestures. Traoré is now asking for action, resistance from within, Africa's prophetic Catholics. The cry for reform has not only come from African presidents or revolutionaries, it has often emerged from within the Church itself. The rise of liberation theology in the 20th century, particularly in Latin America and parts of Africa, called for a church rooted in the struggles of the poor, one that saw Christ not just as a redeemer, but as a liberator. Figures like Dom Helder Câmara in Brazil and Jean-Marc Ayla in Cameroon emphasized that faith without justice was heresy. Ayla, in particular, became a thorn in the side of both church hierarchy and colonial remnants, proclaiming, "If God is not for the poor, he is not God." In Zimbabwe, Archbishop Pius Nakube challenged the Mugabe regime at great personal risk. In Kenya, Cardinal Maurice Otunga famously clashed with both state authorities and the Vatican when he felt the Church was failing the poor. And in South Africa, Bishop Desmond Tutu, though Anglican, often stood side by side with Catholic activists in the anti-apartheid struggle. Despite this, many of these prophetic voices were sidelined or silenced. Liberation theology was labeled Marxist, and Vatican support was tepid at best. Traoré's letter is an echo of their cries, a demand for a church that does not merely anoint the powerful, but uplifts the powerless. It is, in essence, a request for a return to the Church's revolutionary soul. Captain Traoré's words, though addressed to the Pope, speak to a much larger question. Can any institution so old, so global, and so enmeshed in power truly become prophetic again? He challenges the Church to choose between comfort and conscience, between quiet diplomacy and dangerous truth. And he does so from a place that is not just geographical, but historical. A continent that has seen the Church at its worst and still clings to hope for its best. Whether Pope Leo XIV will rise to this challenge remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: Africa is no longer waiting. It is speaking loudly, and it expects the church to listen not from balconies, but from trenches. What do you think about this letter to the new Pope? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible stories. See you next time.